Hope you enjoyed the film. Here we are with director Julien.
Hi there.
So my first impression of the film was, this man had, everything against him, and he just accepted it. And, like I mentioned, he has this euphoria and clarity that he never had before. Had you known him before this project?
Yeah, the film that you're showing next is a film that I did probably 5 years ago, and I'd known him as a kid, seeing his band Dr. Feelgood perform, and I made this film about Dr. Feelgood 5 years ago, and got to know him for the first time then. I had locked eyes with him, like many people who went to his gigs. He would do this extraordinary thing of kind of drilling everybody in the audience with this manic glare while he was machine gunning them with his guitar. So I felt I'd met him, but I actually hadn't until I did this film. And he's a fantastically larger-than-life character on many levels. I had no idea of the kind of range of his interests at that time. So we developed a friendship on that film, and we shared things in common, a love of literature. I loved the fact that he was so into the stars and the night sky, and we travelled various places in the world that made connection easy with him. So, like everyone else, who knew him, when we heard this news, I was completely devastated. He's such a life force, and such an unlikely source of wisdom, really. A Canvey Island sage. It's quite a strange thing to be, but he is one. And the last thing I wanted to do was run up and put a camera in his face at that point. But this extraordinary thing from not spending that much time with him at that time, although we did do some screenings of Royal City that he came to, was that he kept playing. He just didn't stop, and we were very aware that he was going out in this kind of blaze of glory. But it kept going on, longer than the time they told him he had to live. And I only really came around to the idea of possibly filming him when I was asked to do a video for the Roger Daltrey album that he did with Roger, probably at the beginning of last year. So I went down to see him to talk about that, and we just sat and talked, and what he had to say was so surprising to me. My mother was really not well, was passing away at the time, and I did feel quite a lot of kind of uplift from just being with him. The way he was dealing with what was certain death at that time, very imminent death. He was just so playful and uplifting about how you can still enjoy yourself in that position. That I thought, maybe I should just record some conversations with them, just so that they were there, because it seemed wonderful what he was saying. And the extraordinary twist, really, when this became, in a sense, a film, was when, during an interview on the Seawall at Canvey, he said to me, there's a chance he would get out of this, and he was very, kind of terrified in a way that it might be a successful operation. He was scared of being told he was going to have to live. It was a very intriguing headset to then follow through to see how he dealt with, the aftermath of what was actually a very dangerous operation. It could have killed him, and then the infection that he got afterwards, and then he did kill him. It was not a simple process to begin the journey of getting better, but then the physical journey and the mental journey are two very different things, and it's, I think, a very enlightening thing for all of us who don't really need to know in the end whether he was a great guitar player or whatever he did. It's how he brings a sense of great strength and warmth of conveying his feelings to other people. What he's going through is we're all going to know people going through that, or friends or relatives, and in the end ourselves. I think there are some lessons for everyone, regardless of what they think of Wilko.
What are his thoughts on the film? And watching it for him must be very introspective and kind of a journey in itself.
Well, he's a great guy to work with in that way because he just says, "Show me it at the premiere with everyone else." He doesn't say, sit there like some people I've worked with saying, stop the frame there, get rid of that blemish.
He didn't want final cut.
No, he didn't. He's very relaxed about it. Oil City was the same thing. It was wonderful watching Oil City, the film that we're going to show now, with him watching it for the first time with his son. Saying, "Look, I told you it was all, you didn't believe me, did you?" He was like so excited about his son seeing what he'd done because he didn't have any record of it himself and had never shown his son. So it was a very nice thing seeing him in the cinema, full of people from Canvey Island, the premiere of that film, up in the very swank National Film Theatre in London. So that was great. So this time around, he did the same thing. He said, "I'll wait till I see it at the premiere." So I snuck, these between the seats. I managed to jam a camera in front of him with a night vision close-up. So there's this great close-up of Wilko watching the whole film, and it's a real roller coaster ride because it's obviously such an emotional thing, and he's in tears at times, and then he's kind of angry, and then he can't believe what he's seeing. It's a great, strange thing. So I think it will be a DVD extra, watch with Wilko, and insert. You can see how he responded to it when he saw it for the first time.
It's definitely a very cathartic experience, even for the viewer. As a film fanatic, I love all the film references. How did you come up with those? Did that come about from your conversations with him? Did he have any suggestions? I'm sure you have an encyclopedic film knowledge, that you could draw these things from.
Well, it came very much from the conversations that I was having with him. I would go, he didn't suggest anything. He didn't want to suggest anything in the film. He just said, just do it. Do what you're going to do. But each time I had a conversation with him, I did a lot of work lying in bed, half asleep, half awake, and letting images from films that I'd loved as a kid come into play with what he'd said. I saw a lot of these films in 70s English London repertory cinemas, like the Electric cinema used to be a famous cinema, where you would lie back and watch these things, and the lower you got in the seat, the more you'd be aware of the fleas effervescing in front of the screen. And I saw all these Buñuel films and Cocteau and Tarkovsky in places like that. There was another great one called The Tolma, which is now long gone, but it seemed to be where every tramp in London pays sixpence or whatever they would do and get a place, a reasonably warm place to sleep all day. So you'd sit down and you realise your feet were on someone's head, and then you realise they'd be trying to steal your wallet, and it was a lot of interactive stuff going on below the seats, actually. But there, you could have in the end, that got really kind of on its last legs, and it was the most beautiful place to watch a film. In the winter, I remember when the roof had kind of gone, you could be watching Viridiana with the snow falling in front of the screen. That was quite a magical thing to do. So, I was very involved in watching films in London at that time, and a lot of them were films that did deal with themes of mortality and seemed to suggest themselves. Wilko is wonderfully adept at dropping the most wide-ranging quotes into everyday conversation. It's quite funny, people don't know that they're quotes because they do weirdly make a lot of sense in the context of how he uses them, although, it's a kind of pub conversation on a South End weekend.
He uses Shakespeare as like a talking point,
Shakespeare, Chaucer, Blake. He has a fantastic, incredible memory as well, because if he starts reciting Piers Plowman, you have to stop him after 10 minutes. We'll go on, you know. It's quite unbelievable. So I was trying to find a way of cinematically kind of matching the way that he was throwing around, you know, literary quotes, and find ways of using them in tandem with what he was saying verbally.
Now, and I love the setup with the Seventh Seal kind of recreation, you know, that worked really well because he actually looks like he would be in a Bergman film, you know?
Yeah, the planes of his face are eternally fascinating to film. He's got an incredible face.
Yeah.
And a very projectable skull, you know. Project really interesting things on him. But he's got a great sense of humour, that's the thing. And you know, I didn't want to use these quotes, cinematic quotes, too you know, academically. I wanted them to be funny and, you know, have a sense of humour. Originally, I did have a Bill and Ted, you know, Seventh Seal estate thing in there, but we couldn't afford that one, so that had to come out.
So for us Americans here, tell us a little bit about Canvey Island and why it's so, you know, why it's such a big part of this story and the next film as well.
Well, Canvey is a very unique place, and again, you know, I had a connection with my mother and her family. Her father had a chalet on Canvey Island, which a lot of people from the East End of London, which was the real Cockney area, Wilko speaks with this Cockney accent. It's kind of the real repository of East End London that has gone from London. A lot of them still exist on Canvey Island. Certainly when Wilko was brought up, a lot of people had left because of the bombing and the war. And Canvey is an incredibly East End feel to it, but it was also the nearest beach to the East End. So it had this strange English seaside resort vibe in the shadow of these crazy oil refineries. Lee Brillo's wife came from Alabama, and she married him, and he took her to what she thought was the bucolic English countryside. And she woke up on Canvey Island, as you'll see in the next film, and thought, reminds me of Louisiana, you know, the oil refineries. You know, it's a very strange mixture of kind of ugliness and stark, weird, decaying beauty. It's also below sea level. It shouldn't really exist. It was drained by Dutch engineers in the 17th century. The sea wall is 18 feet, you know, protects it. It's all under.
Wilko talks about a large flood that happened there, I think in the 50s, 60s, that like it affected the town. It's still, you know, it's still reeling from that, right? Yeah,
it was really of a biblical proportion. This flood. It affected Holland on the other side of the North Sea, but it completely broke this sea wall, and the whole place of Canvey was just totally flooded. And you know, I think another member of Dr. Fiedler was found floating like Moses in the basket. You know, and was strangely you know, impacted on the whole psyche of that area. They still talk about the flood. So, you know, back to Canvey, it means a lot to him. Obviously, I don't think he lives there, right? He overlooks it. He's on the other side now. But there's something, you know, you leave the mainland, you're out of England proper when you go to Canvey. There's a definite strangeness about it. And he's the poet of Canvey. They all grew up on Canvey, and he wrote his version of, he called it the Thames Delta Blues. He kind of distilled the blues idea into this Canvey mudflats and refineries that are a bit like Mississippi. You can see where he got that from. I mean, like I told you earlier, I mean, the Dr. Fiedler has a distinctly American sound. I didn't know they were a British band until I was told after the fact, and you know, that's very telling of, like, you know, his influences, you know, that you demonstrate in the film. I want to talk about the Roger Daltrey collaboration that did really well last year, and you know, kind of brought him back to like the British, you know, pop music forefront. Have they known each other for a long time? I don't think they had, actually. I mean, I think I know that Roger Daltrey, when you talked to him, he was aware of Dr. Phil and really liked
Right.
that sound, but I don't think they'd really been close friends. I know that they met actually when there was something to do with Oil City. There was a magazine award thing, and they were sitting at the same table, and they talked about doing an album a few years ago before Wilko got ill. And I know that when Roger heard that Wilko was ill, he was very keen to do something together before it was too late.
Yeah, like you said in the film, it's like, we need to do this now or we're not going to do it at all. You know?
It was a pressing element.
Yeah, but I mean, that, from, you know, as I was watching the film and I didn't know how it would end, I thought, wow, this is a great swan song for this man, and, you know, what a great, you know, have such a great success at the end of your career, and then something else happened, you know, he lives, and so what do you know about what he's doing now, and what his, you know, because everything changed for him, you know,
well,
everything he
there's
knew.
a sense the more miserable he gets, you know, the better he's getting.
Yeah.
But I think his salvation is being able to play again. You know, that's what he exists for, and that's what he's, you know, fascinating when you see him do it. And for a while, you know, the physical thing of having to recover from this huge operation meant he couldn't really play. And when he started to play, it wasn't as easy as it used to be. But having seen him recently, it's very clear that, you know, he's back on complete, you know, 100% of what he can be, and I think he's a lot happier as a result. He knows he can do what he really does.
That's great.
Best, you know.
No, it's a great story. I mean, this became a big cinematic, you know, like, you know, by accident. I guess we'll take questions from the audience. If anyone has anything to ask Mr. Temple. I can't really see because of the lights, so just start speaking.
Hi, I was kind of surprised by the reception in Japan, that how much they embrace Wilko in there. So could you talk about that, like how he kind of influenced the Japanese actually folks over there?
Well, I think Wilko has a very special relationship with Japan. He's been going there a long time. He did play with. In the 80s, he started going with his own band, and then with the Injury. I know he played there, and I just think he, you know, he's a very contemplative guy, and I think he just loved the tranquility that he found particularly in Kyoto. So it's strange because, you know, he gets on stage and makes a huge amount of noise, but there's a part of him that really is a reflective, loves silence and places where you can think. And I don't know why they loved him there, but they certainly, maybe it's the way he moves on stage, you know, because it's very, to me it always felt like, when I first saw it, almost like a kabuki kind of theatrical act between him and the guy in the white suit who didn't move, and Wilko was kind of circling him in this kind of rappel, attract, kind of a moth around some mad flame. I mean, it's quite a theatrical thing, their performance, but was completely spontaneous. But I know that the Japanese were they liked the kind of, the gestures of Wilko, which are unique, but it seemed to go down really well in Japan for some reason. You probably have to tell me why. But he loves it there, and they seem to love him, so.
Another one?
I felt like so much of the production really reflected Wilko's soul and his personality, and I was just wondering, how involved was he in that? Like in the production of the film?
Well, as I was saying to Tony, he is an interesting person to work for, because he just lets you hang yourself, go away and do what you've got to do. I've worked with people who are much more controlling, you know, want to be much more involved, and that can be good or it can be bad. You know, the great thing about Wilko is he doesn't want to be, he doesn't want you to make him look endlessly good. He's happy to show whatever flaws he's got, and you know, he's was not a perfect human being by a long shot. So it's quite liberating to work with someone like that, that just says, you know, let's talk, and then you go away and do what you want with it, and I'll see it when you've finished. It's very unusual. But I think he is very confident in who he is. You know, he's not a kind of hasn't got a lot invested in being a big rock and roll star. I think he's kind of beyond that point, really. So he's not that precious about things. And we did get on very well on the first film, so I think to an extent he trusted me this time in a way he wouldn't have done the first time round as much, perhaps.
Another question?
The big joke in the film is when he says, "So now I'm back to being miserable like I was," and I actually laughed. It made me laugh when about that. But going back to like the different period, the euphoria, and he talks about the acid and how. Can you talk about the psychedelic aspect of that kind of period of his life? Was it trip? You know, it was like a trip for him, or what?
Well, he says it was very different, but that there was. I mean, I think there is something of William Blake in Wilko. In the fact they shared this thick Cockney accent maybe helps that, but even the way he wrote his songs about, you know, the oil refineries at dawn, you know, down by the jetty, the towers burning at break of day. It's a very kind of visionary take on this weird little place called Canvey. And, you know, like a lot of people in his generation, he did do acid, and when he had this completely unexpected, from his point of view, reaction to this death sentence, where he felt suddenly vividly alive and happy, and an extraordinary clarity of seeing everything around him, and this kind of weight lifted from him of being what he admits he was, a miserable sod, you know, whatever, you know, grumpy, prone to melancholy. Suddenly that seemed to go, and everything was vividly alive around him. And, you know, I think he recalled aspects of possibly what, you know, an acid experience can be. Or, you know, that's why, in a sense, I call it the Ecstasy of Wilko Johnson, because it's, you know, the Blakean thing, or the ecstasy of the medieval saints who suddenly had this overwhelming sense of spiritual connection with everything around them. I think he did have something like that. When I spoke to him at times, it was like he was in a waking dream at that point before he knew he was going to get better. Whether that was somehow a denial of what was going on, I don't know, but it was very strange to see someone that energized by being told they were going to die. And it was a very real thing. He wasn't faking it. It was something he couldn't help. Which made, I think, the reality of having to deal with being sentenced to live after having shared everything and attained this kind of state of grace in a way, was even harder. It was harder, certainly, as he says, for him to be told he was going to live than to be told he was going to die, which is not the way you would normally think things would go. You know.
And do you think he has remorse now?
Remorse?
Yes.
For aspects of the way he lived?
For having told everybody, you know, thought that he was there, and then having to sort of come back.
He did say it was, you know, a bit like the boy who cried wolf. Every time he was doing a farewell tour, he would say goodbye to everyone, and then 6 weeks later he was bored and wanted to play and did another tour. I don't know whether he felt huge remorse for it. I don't think he tricked anyone or misled anyone. I think he was just genuinely swept away by what he was feeling, and in that, you know, probably if he'd had a second opinion early on, you know, really seriously gone and said, check this out, someone else, none of this would have happened. You know, there's some other doctor who said, well, it's a very rare form of pancreatic cancer and we can operate. And that would have been a lot easier than waiting until this tumour had, developed to that size and infected a lot of other organs in his body that made the operation very dangerous. So I think he was just overwhelmed by hearing that verdict, and his response was just so visceral that he didn't think to question it. And somehow he was probably in a stronger, if he'd been trying chemotherapy and all other ways of dealing with it, he probably would have been in a worse physical state by the time he had the operation and may not have survived it, bizarrely.
We have time for one last question, so go for it.
Silence. Okay, thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you. And if you're staying for the next film, we're doing an intro for that, Oil City Confidential, which ties in with this last film you just saw. Thank you. And tomorrow, make sure to come and see The Clash, The Kinks, and The Sex Pistols, directed by Julien.
I think it's quite a good way round to see it, actually, that you didn't know a lot about this guy, and then this next film will tell you lots about him, what he liked for breakfast when he was a kid and things like that.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming.